Tonight, we delve into the most disturbing missing 411 cases we've reported so far. From national parks to international mysteries, these unnerving tales, inspired by David Paulides, defy all explanation. Enjoy. The Pennine region in England, between Lancashire and Yorkshire, is commonly referred to as UFO Valley, which means absolutely nothing to Leocadia Adamski. Not only does it have no bearing on her day-to-day life, but especially now that she is too busy worrying about her husband, Zygmunt, who's been missing for 12 days. But the person about to knock on her door will change her world forever. Leocadia, or Lottie as she is known, is beside herself. She's a wreck with worry today. Her husband of 29 years, Zygmunt, or Ziggy, has been missing for 12 days now. He went out for a bag of potatoes and never came home. And there might be a joke in there somewhere if she didn't feel like her world was crashing down around her. Lottie and Ziggy are Polish immigrants who, after both having nasty run-ins with the Nazis after they invaded Poland in 1939, fled to the Leeds area of the UK. Eventually, they met and were married in 1951. And since they both have had enough drama in Poland, they settled down in the small town of Tingley, just outside of Leeds, to build themselves a nice, quiet life together. And they do a pretty good job of it. Ziggy gets a good, stable job at the coal mine that supports them both. But life is not life without some drama. Since they moved to Tingley, Lottie was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and is now in a wheelchair. But they've managed to build a good community of friends and family and are both well liked by everybody. Ziggy and Lottie are never able to have any children of their own. So instead, Ziggy kind of leans into his relationship with his goddaughter, and the two become pretty close. So close that Ziggy is set to walk her down the aisle for her upcoming wedding. But then it happened. The day before the wedding, Lottie will never forget that day, June 6th, 1980, when her world stopped. Ziggy went shopping that morning with his cousin Laska, who had been staying with them for a couple of months. After the two came home and had lunch with Lottie, Ziggy gets up from the table and announces that he's running down the street because he forgot to buy the potatoes that they're going to need for the next day's festivities. He grabs his striped coat and his wallet and heads out the door. He walks to the store, buys his bag of potatoes, and starts heading back to home, but stops to chat with the neighbors for a few minutes. And that is the last time anyone has seen Ziggy in the last 12 days. The grocery store is like a whole 3 blocks down the road. So to walk there, buy potatoes, and walk back should have taken all of 15-20 minutes max. So after half an hour, Lottie sends Laska out to see what the problem is. But Ziggy is nowhere. Lottie starts calling everyone she can think of and raising the alarm that something is wrong, including calling the police. The police tell her to just sit tight for a day or two and just see what happens. Surely he will be back in time for the wedding. But he wasn't. So she files a missing persons report, and the police start checking around a bit, talking to family, friends, and neighbors. And they talk to one of Ziggy's closest friends, Christopher Solinsky, who'd been out at the pub with Ziggy just 2 days before he disappeared. He told police that Ziggy seemed like his normal, cheery self. He described the Adamski's marriage as happy and said that there's no way that Ziggy would voluntarily disappear and leave his wheelchair-bound wife, Lottie, to fend for herself. No way. But so far, no one has either seen or heard a thing. No leads, no theories, nothing. He's just gone. So Lottie has done nothing for these last 12 days except sit in her chair and pray that God will return her Ziggy. Then, a knock at the door. A young man who was visiting Lottie gets up and answers the door for her. Standing on her front steps are a detective and police constable Alan Godfrey. The two officers come in and inform Lottie that they are there because they heard she had filed a missing persons report about her husband. They had some pictures to show her. Pictures, it turns out, of Ziggy. 7 days earlier, on June 11th, Alan Godfrey is standing on a stoop, having a smoke and trying to stay out of the rain, when a call comes on his radio asking officers to respond to an incident at the Tomlinson coal yard. I'm on my way. What's going on?
The body's been found.
As he steps out into the rain, a police car pulls in front of him, driven by his friend and fellow cop Malcolm, who tells him to get in, and the two are off to the coal yard. When they get there, they are greeted by two paramedics and Trevor Parker, the son of the coal yard's owner. "We think you have a murder," came the greeting from one paramedic. Malcolm and Alan look around, but they don't see a body anywhere. So they both look back at the paramedics, kind of confused. And one paramedic says, "Look up." So they scan a little higher and spot it. At the very top of one of the coal piles, about 15 feet up, is something that definitely doesn't belong there. The two officers work their way up the pile, the coal constantly shifting under their feet as they go. And Alan notices something. As he and Malcolm are climbing, they're messing up this once perfect pile. But if it was perfect when they got there, how did this body get up there without messing it up? The body is lying face down, so the two men turn it over, and even as seasoned policemen, they are not prepared for what they see. The face that rolls over to greet them is a frozen picture of fear, with eyes wide open and a mouth fixed in a silent scream. Alan recoils for a moment, but then years of training quickly take over and he starts examining the scene. The body is that of an older male wearing a nice brown suit. Interesting though, the suit is perfectly clean, while Alan and Malcolm are now covered in coal dust. How did he climb up here without so much as a smudge of dust on his clothes? Also, there's something off about the suit. The jacket is buttoned wrong, the pants are buttoned wrong, and he's only wearing a string vest under the jacket. It's like someone dressed him in these clothes and got it wrong. And it looks like someone gave him a really bad haircut. Like someone had just taken scissors and hacked away a few bits, some of them down to the scalp. Alan and Malcolm can't see any obvious cause of death, but they do see an open wound on the back of his neck at the base of his skull that looks to have some kind of greenish ointment smeared all over it. And they can also see a few penny-sized spots around his head and shoulders that look like burn marks. Well, there's not much more that they can do now, so they climb down the pile and call the Criminal Investigation Department. While they're waiting for the CID guys, they talk to Trevor Parker, the young man who discovered the body. He says he was at the coal yard this morning and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The coal yard is just this huge fenced-in area with piles of coal all around, and trucks go in and out throughout the day, either bringing in more coal or loading some up to take away. Trevor then leaves for lunch and to check on some of the other coal yards, and when he comes back around 3:45, he immediately sees something lying on top of one of those piles. He goes to check it out, sees a shoe, and calls the paramedics, thinking that it is yet another stray drunk who's found his way into the coal yard. Apparently it happens a lot. The pathologist who did the autopsy, Alan Edwards, noted that this guy had apparently been eating well and wasn't malnourished or dehydrated, although it doesn't look like he ate anything on the day that he died. And there's only about 1 day's worth of stubble on his face. And the time of death is calculated as being between 11:15 a.m. and 1:15 p.m. on the 11th. So the same day that he was found on the coal pile. So apparently right after Trevor left for lunch. The burn marks around his head and shoulders look like some type of acid burns that he estimates to be about 2 days old. And the greenish jelly substance over the wound at the base of the skull is tested, and they can't identify it. There are no defensive wounds. The only other wounds on the body are a few small light cuts on the palms of both of his hands, both knees, and a small cut on the right thigh. The cause of death is ruled as heart failure, or more specifically, a combination of emphysema and ischemic heart disease. In other words, natural causes. Alan Godfrey is tasked with trying to figure out who this John Doe actually is. So he hits the pavement, checking out shops and pubs in the Todmorden area, but no one has ever seen this guy. He calls all the area hospitals to see if anyone has been treated for a head wound in the last few days, and nothing. Eventually, someone connects the dots and clues Alan Godfrey into a missing persons report of a man that sounds an awful lot like his John Doe. But it's from Tingley. That's almost 25 miles or 40 kilometers from Todmorden. What would he be doing out here? But lacking any other leads, Alan and the detective assigned to the case make that fateful trip to Tingley on June 18th, which lands them on Lottie's doorstep. She's heartbroken, but there's really not anything else that she can do but wait for the coroner's inquest to hopefully get some answers as to what the hell happened to her husband. Now, a coroner's inquest is a formal legal investigation conducted by the coroner with the help of the pathologist into a death where either the cause of death or the circumstances surrounding it remain unknown. In Ziggy's case, the coroner sticks to the pathologist's findings that Ziggy dies of natural causes. It's the circumstances surrounding it that are the issue. Despite protestations from Alan and Malcolm, they rule that Ziggy died where he was found. Alan and Malcolm are not even called to testify. Okay, fine. But if he disappeared on the 6th and he died on the 11th, where was he for those 5 days? And how did he end up at the top of the coal pile? Trevor Parker testified that he was not expecting any deliveries that day, so he didn't come in on a truck and get dumped. And that nice brown suit he was wearing? It wasn't his. Lottie confirmed that those were not the clothes Ziggy was wearing when he left the house. And where are his wallet and watch? The closest thing to a rational explanation to this entire scenario is that Ziggy had been kidnapped by a family member and held in a shed for 5 days. Remember Ziggy's cousin, Laska? Well, apparently she was staying with Ziggy and Lottie because things were not going well between her and her husband. Like, restraining order bad. So the theory is that Laska's husband, in a fit of rage, kidnaps Ziggy and tortures him for 5 days before Ziggy's heart just can't take it anymore and gives out. And exactly how did he think this would make things better with his wife? But police find zero evidence that this is how things actually went down. It just doesn't make sense. If that's what happened, why would Laska's husband dump Ziggy's body in a wide open area in the middle of the day when the chances of getting caught are pretty high? And if they dragged his dead body to the top of the pile, why aren't Ziggy's clothes covered in soot? And why bother to drag a heavy body to the top of the coal pile? And bonus, if he was dragged up there by someone, how did the pile of coal show no signs of anyone climbing it? Nonetheless, the coroner's inquest concludes with an open finding. In other words, they have no idea. But Once the inquest is over, the coroner, James Turnbull, gives an odd statement to the press. The question of where he was before he died and what led to his death could not be answered. In my 12,000 cases, this is the most baffling I've ever had. If I was told a UFO took this man up and dropped him on the coal pile, I would only raise one eyebrow. Sounds like a weird end to a weird story, right? Well, it is, but that's not the end. At least not for Officer Alan Godfrey. As ticked off as he was about the results of the coroner's inquest, he managed to eventually leave all of the unanswered questions in the past and get back to his regular life as a Todmorden beat cop. Life was pretty much back to normal until the rainy, dreary evening of November 27th, 1980. So just 6 months after the discovery of Ziggy Adamski's body on the coal pile. Alan has just started his night shift and is on his way to the northwest part of Todmorden to check out a report of a number of escaped cows out on an unsanctioned walkabout. When a second call comes in, somebody else has spotted the cows. But when Alan finally gets there, he doesn't see any cows. And that's when it dawns on him, he's been punked, and so he just heads back to the station. But then a third call comes in from the same neighborhood complaining about the cows. But this time it's an old lady, not likely a practical joker. So he heads back out there. He gets to the house around midnight and is greeted at the door by a lovely older woman who invites him in and offers him some tea. And she explains that she had been sleeping but woke up because of some strange noises outside. She looked out the window and she saw 5 or 6 cows in the street, puts in her call to the police, and goes back to the window to keep tabs on those hooligan cows. It's then that she's hit with a blinding light that lights up her entire house. When the light fades, the cows are gone. Alan suggests that maybe it was just the headlights of a car passing by that scared the cows away. The old woman isn't so convinced. The following morning, toward the end of Alan's all-nighter shift, so now the morning of November 28th, at about 5 a.m., 3 officers in Halifax are wandering around north of the city around the moors. A moor is a low, hilly area covered in only low-growing vegetation and is sometimes wet, containing peat bogs. So these guys are out there checking out a tip on some stolen motorcycles. All 3 of them see a blue, pulsating light hanging just under the low cloud cover and moving erratically, not like any aircraft any of them have ever seen before. The movements are so wild and unpredictable that one of the officers said, "Enough of this, I'm going back to the car." The blue light then heads toward the officers, buzzes over the top of them, and takes off at a crazy fast speed in the direction of Todmorden. About 5 minutes later, in a little town on the outskirts of northern Manchester called Littleborough, 2 police officers sat in their car in the parking lot of a local pub called the White House when they noticed a blue, pulsating light off in the distance, hovering between 2 electrical towers. Oddly enough, neither of them saw the object appear, but they sat there just mesmerized by it. One of the officers makes a sketch drawing of the light, while the other radios into the station to let somebody know what it is that they are looking at. They stare at it for a few more minutes before it shoots off at a high rate of speed again towards Todmorden. Roughly 5 minutes later, so around 5:10 a.m., Alan is getting into his car for his last patrol around town before his shift ends. The rain had finally stopped, but he still had those stupid cows on his mind. So he heads off back toward that area to take one more stab at finding them. He's heading north on Burnley Road when he sees something in the road. About 5 minutes later, So around 5:15 a.m., Leonard Smith, the caretaker for Fernie Lee Junior School, which is north of Burnley Road, is walking across the school grounds when he notices something dark in the sky to the south of him, so right over Burnley Road. It's hard to see in the morning darkness, but it looks like it is rising from the road. And it zigzags a bit and then shoots off at an insane speed. Around 45 minutes later, Alan's friend and fellow officer, Malcolm, is just leaving the station at the end of his shift when Alan comes racing up in his police car, stops, rolls down the window, and tells Malcolm to get in now. Malcolm really just wants to go home, but Alan's face is pale with a very dire look. So Malcolm gets in the car and thinks, this better be good. It was. Trying to catch his breath and calm down, Alan tells Malcolm about how he was on his way back to the area of the renegade cows, but just as he was about to take a right off of Burnley Road to head north to the area, he sees something in the road about 100 yards in front of him sitting in the middle of Burnley Road. So he passes the turnoff to go north and heads toward the object, thinking it's a bus that's crashing his jackknife across the road. But then he realizes that this thing is way bigger than a bus and is floating about 5 feet off the ground. By Alan's estimates, it's about 20 feet wide and 14 feet tall. And it's actually diamond-shaped and in two halves, the top half being stationary and the bottom half rotating. And it has a row of dark windows all the way around. Alan hears no sound, but notices the trees and bushes to the sides of the object are shaking all around as if there's a big wind blowing them all over. But Alan doesn't see or feel any wind. Alan stops his car about 30 feet away from the thing and turns on his blue police lights and hazard lights, because whatever it is, it's blocking the entire road. He tries to radio into the police station to let them know there is a problem on Burnley Road, but his personal radio doesn't work. Neither does the radio in the car. So he starts doing what every British constable is taught to do at the site of an accident. Alan takes out his notepad and starts to sketch what he sees. And he remembers starting that sketch, but not finishing it. Because before he has a chance, a brilliant light, like 100 suns, hits Alan's face. By the time the blindness from the light flash clears, the object is gone. And Alan is another 50 yards up the road with his hands on the steering wheel and the car rolling along in first gear. Blue police lights are off, hazard lights are off, and the headlights of the car are off. Alan quickly turns the car around and goes back. Now, remember, it's been raining all night, so everything is still wet except for that spot on the road. It's dry with a whirlpool pattern of twigs lying on the road. Now, it's almost 6 a.m. 30 minutes gone, literally in a flash. Malcolm doesn't know what to say about Alan's story, as Alan drives him back to the spot where he saw whatever it is that he saw. And they get out of the car, and Malcolm can see the dry circle on the road with the whirlpool of twigs, just like Alan had described. He knelt down and touched the dry patch of the road. And despite it being a cold, rainy November morning, the dry patch is warm. They look around, and Alan remembers that they are right next to Centervale Park, hoping maybe to find some early morning joggers or dog walkers who had witnessed what Alan had witnessed. They grab their flashlights and head toward the park. They have to cross a small bridge that spans a gully that runs almost the entire length of the park parallel to Burnley Road. And when they get to the main gate, it's locked. The two climb over the fence and just start walking through the park. And in the pre-dawn darkness, Alan can barely make out the outline of a number of dark shadows moving around on the other side of the park. He shines his flashlight in that direction, only to see, staring right back at him, the faces of a half a dozen cows. In the days and weeks that followed, Alan learned a number of very important things. First, he learned that it would be really hard for cows to wander from the neighborhood where they were first spotted through town, across the road, over the gully next to the road, and through the locked gate of the park. He also learned that the road leading to the house of the little old lady who served him tea while telling him of the disappearing cows was not situated in a way where lights from oncoming traffic could shine through her windows. Whatever that light was that shined in her house was not from a car. And he learned that all records concerning both Ziggy Adamski's death and his own encounter, including the reports filed to the Ministry of Defense by not only himself, but the 3 other officers from Halifax as well, are totally locked down as classified. There's actually a lot more to Alan's story than I could cover here, but he wrote a book called Who or What Were They that details his entire ordeal that I will link in the description below if you care to take a deeper look into his story. So, what plucked Ziggy from the face of the earth, killed him, and set him back down on that pile of coal? And what happened in that 30-minute chunk of time that Alan lost that morning on the road? Do they have anything to do with each other? Or are these events just some massive coincidence? As much as I would love to say the truth is out there, in this case, I'm not sure we're ever going to find it. In the fall of 1952, seasoned hunter and lifelong outdoorsman James Madison, along with his good friend Claude Buffalo, another seasoned outdoorsman, heads out for a hunting trip in the wilderness of Nez Perce National Forest. They pick a remote location 14 miles east of the Red River Ranger Station as their base camp, and even though the hunting season doesn't start until September 15th, they head out on the 11th with the plan of getting their camp ready and the area scouted so they are ready to pull their triggers on the 15th. So on the 11th, the men get to their chosen spot and establish their campsite. James, armed with a rifle and a bucket, ventures off toward a nearby creek to go get some water. After about a half an hour, Claude realizes that James is still gone. So he sets off after him, calling out his name into the encroaching darkness. However, Claude doesn't hear a thing. He searches for James all night. So as the sun starts to rise, Claude drives to the ranger station to report James missing. Immediately, a team of rangers, local sheriff's deputies, and bloodhounds are rounded up and sent out to search. The dogs pick up a scent, and the trail is followed with the handlers sure that they will have James back safe and sound before sundown. Until they figure out that the dogs have been tracking the scent of another hunter. Tracker dogs are usually really effective in these cases, but this time they are unable to pick up James's scent, and no tracks are ever found. In the following days, a search team of nearly 150 people, including 4 airmen from a local military transport school, scour the woods and take to the skies. Still, there are no signs of James. It's not until September 24th, 13 days after James's disappearance, that 4 hikers stumble upon a disturbing sight. They find a body face down in the Salmon River in only 18 inches of water, 20 feet from shore, 15 miles from the last known location of James. The man is James Madison. Strangely, he's only wearing his underwear and a t-shirt, and his bare feet are worn down to the bone. Not the picture of the prepared outdoorsman James is known to be. The coroner's report suggests James' death is due to exhaustion rather than drowning, which means they didn't find any water in his lungs. So the working theory is that James wanders for 10 days before reaching the Salmon River, 15 miles away, walks into the river, and actually ceases breathing before his body hits the water where he's found, with almost no clothes, no boots, and the bottoms of his feet literally worn away. How exactly does this happen to a seasoned outdoorsman who ventured out on a short trip to get some water in a bucket? The mystery surrounding James's disappearance and subsequent death remains an inexplicable event lost in the vast forest he loved. Kevin and Heidi Bardsley have a busy family. With 4 kids that seem to be involved in everything, most of their time seems like it's spent chauffeuring one kid or another from one sport to another or one activity to another. Their youngest, Garrett, is a happy, healthy, 5 foot tall, 110-pound, 12-year-old kid who loves baseball and the outdoors. It's getting close to the end of summer, and Garrett's Boy Scout troop decides to go on a wilderness weekend. It's not an official Boy Scout event. They just want to get out one more time, just one last time before school starts. Their scoutmaster, Wally Trotter, can't join him that weekend because he's got to work, but he brings his son and Garrett's friend, Alex, to the meeting site that Thursday morning to help pack the trucks and see off the other kids and the dads, including Kevin, Garrett, and Garrett's 2 brothers, Cameron and Jared. Thursday, August 19th, 2004, the troop heads up high into the High Uinta Mountains in Utah. They have to hike for about an hour before they even get to their camp, which is somewhere around a circle of lakes called the Cuberant Lakes. Friday morning, Garrett and Kevin wake up early and decide to go fishing to see if they can catch their breakfast. They grab their gear and head out of camp on a well-established trail that they've been on several times already that takes them to the lake shore, less than a quarter mile from camp. Garrett accidentally slips on the shore rocks, getting his shoes and socks wet. So his dad says, "Why don't you head back to camp and get some dry ones?" Kevin watches his son head off down the path to camp, still carrying his fishing pole, until he can't see him any longer. Then he goes back to fishing, just waiting for Garrett to return. After about 15 minutes, Kevin realizes that Garrett hasn't returned yet. So he, too, heads back down the trail to camp. And when he gets there, he asks the other people in the camp, "Where's Garrett?" And they all say, "We haven't seen him." And Kevin knows there's trouble. He and others from their camp start fanning out, calling Garrett's name. He's only been missing for a few minutes, so he can't be that far, right? But their calls are met with silence. Back at home, Wally Trotter is at work trying to be productive, but he notices this intermittent feeling of apprehension that keeps coming over him, making him think that maybe there's something wrong with his son Alex. But eventually, an opposite feeling of peace envelops him, and he knows Alex is fine, and he puts those concerns behind him. Later that morning, Wally's instinct tells him he needs to call Gary Hansen, one of the supervisors on the trip. But he thinks, well, I can't do that because no one on the mountain is going to have cell service. Little did he know that at that very moment, Gary is down from the mountain and starting to make calls for help in searching for Garrett. That's when Wally's phone rings. He listens intently for a moment, tells the caller, "I'm on my way," flies into his boss's office and says, "I'm out," and he is on his way driving up to the mountain. Wally's thinking, I am sure by the time I actually get there, they will have found him already. But when he arrives at the campsite, he finds that his imagination is far from reality. The good news is that the Sheriff's Department and the FBI both mobilize quickly in getting a search organized. The bad news is that Garrett is out in the elements without any camping gear except his fishing pole, and not much camping experience, much less survival experience. And this is the latter part of August, up at about about an altitude of 10,000 feet, so it's chilly, especially at night. And he's only wearing a hoodie with a t-shirt underneath it, sweatpants, and his wet shoes and socks. Within hours, hundreds of law enforcement officers and volunteers are combing the mountainside, most likely all thinking the same thing. He can't be that far. Friday night brings helicopters with loudspeakers calling Garrett's name and searchlights. According to Wally, he's never seen a spotlight that could light up the trees and the mountainside like that one did. How could Garrett not see that? Later that night, after many of the searchers have gone home for the night, several men stay awake all night long, lighting bonfires along the shore of the lake, hoping that they'll act as beacons to guide Garrett back to camp. But it doesn't work, and the temperature drops to 18 degrees that night. Of course, the thing Kevin wants most is to have his son back, but he also wishes his wife Heidi was by his side. And she's on her way, but she is on a cruise with friends when Kevin calls her. Can you imagine how hard that phone call is? To, as a parent, have to call your spouse and tell them that you've lost your child? Heidi says the immediate sick feeling in the pit of her stomach told her all she needed to know. Garrett was never going to be found. But she also knew it was her job to try. So as much as she didn't want to go, she headed for the mountain to be there for her husband and to do everything that she could to find her son. Interestingly enough, Kevin receives the same divine message. On one of the first of many times he would hit his knees to beg God, "Please, I will do anything you ask. Just let me have my son back." The answer he receives is, "You don't have to worry about Garrett. His test is done." Kevin, however, does not want to accept that as an answer. For the next couple of days, he does not stop moving and never runs out of energy. He stays out searching until long after all the other searchers have gone to bed. When he's the last one standing, he hikes to his car, drives to town, and calls people, his wife, his daughter, other family members, just to hear their voices. Then he would drive back up the mountain and force himself to sleep for like an hour or so. Once Heidi arrives on the mountain, Kevin calms down a little, but doesn't stop searching, because searching is the only thing he can do to keep the grief and the panic and the guilt at bay. The only time he ever takes away from the search is to take a few minutes here and there to offer up yet another prayer for the safe return of his son. But even that little respite is getting harder and harder for Kevin to take because he keeps getting the same answer. Don't worry about Garrett. Saturday morning dawns sunny and a bit warmer, which warms up the shivering volunteers and their hope and vigor for another day of searching. But it's also the last day of the scouting trip. It's time for the scouts, including Garrett's brothers and his friends Alex and Tanner, to go home. Wally, remember he's one of the scoutmasters for the troop, helps the boys pack up their gear to go home and admits that one of the hardest things for him of this entire ordeal is watching Cameron and Jared, Garrett's brothers, pack up his things in his backpack. Guilt is also starting to take its toll. Heidi can't eat or sleep, not when she knows her youngest child is lost out in the wilderness without food or shelter. Saturday night is the hardest for Wally. The nice warm sunshine they had in the morning turns to rain, and by the time he's done searching for the day, he is cold, wet, and tired. He goes back to his tent, changes his clothes, crawls into his sleeping bag, and tries to get some rest. But the scoutmaster in him knows what this means. If Garrett is still alive out there, he's now wet. A wet body and freezing temperatures, Garrett's probably not going to make it through the night. And Wally is overwhelmed with guilt just for being warm. By Sunday, 2 days after Garrett had last been seen, searchers still hold out hope Garrett is alive. But the day brings nothing new. Not to mention that now it starts to snow, which makes looking for any clues almost impossible. And many volunteers, including Wally, have to go home to get ready for work on Monday morning. On Tuesday, the rescue mission is officially changed to a recovery mission, with just 50 search and rescue personnel still searching to bring Garrett home. Wednesday would bring the only clue to ever be found in this entire mystery. Searchers find a sock that Heidi identifies as being Garrett's. It's found about a half a mile from camp in the middle of a wide open boulder field, and it looks like it was taken off and thrown away while it was wet. The number of volunteers swells to about 1,000 on the second weekend, but by Sunday, 9 days after Garrett has gone missing, Summit County declares the official search to be over. No trace of Garrett is ever found except that one sock, not even his fishing pole. But before you start thinking this is the end of the story, it's not. The following year is a really tough one for the Paulides. Naturally, they spend every moment that they can on the mountain looking for Garrett, until October, when winter closes that door for him, and reality begins to set in. They notice immediate changes in their family. The 3 remaining kids, Courtney, Jared, and Cameron, grow closer and become more protective and more sensitive to each other. Cameron, he's the one that was closest in age to Garrett, so he takes this loss especially hard. The 2 boys had always shared a room until just a few months before, when Cameron decided he wanted his own room. But after Garrett's gone, Cameron doesn't want to be alone, and Jared immediately takes him into his room and says, "I want Cameron to be with me." Kevin is more sensitive to Heidi's feelings as well and does whatever he can not to add to the pain she's already feeling. Their faith holds them together as a family as they struggle to move away from the easy emotional pit of, why did this happen? Why us? And move toward finding the purpose of it all, because they know that how they react and move forward is totally up to them. And it won't take long before the signs of purpose they're searching for start to show themselves. People start to contact the Paulides and share their stories. One man decides to donate money every month to a different charity. Another man, a music teacher on the East Coast, pledges to spend his free time finding and fixing up instruments for inner city schools. One local man who suffers from involuntary convulsions feels a strong urge to join the search for Garrett, despite his disability. His wife says, "Are you nuts?" And the man says, "I went to bed that night and just felt this overwhelming impression that I needed to go." The man drives up the mountain, hauls out his backpack, and starts up the trail, suffering from convulsions the whole way. As the man walks into the forest, the convulsions stop, and he never experiences them again. But the biggest purpose-driven flag comes in June of the following summer. An 11-year-old named Brendan Hawkins is in the Uinta Mountains, just 5 miles from where Garrett went missing the summer before. Brennan is with 1,400 other Boy Scouts at the Bear River Boy Scout Camp. On Friday, June 17th, several boys see Brennan removing his climbing harness after scaling the climbing wall. But no one knows what happens to him after that. He's just gone. As the Summit County Sheriff, Dave Edmonds, is once again organizing a search effort, he puts a call into Kevin Bardsley and says, "You have the experience, you have the contacts, you know what the family is going through. You want to give us a hand?" On Kevin's part, there is no decision to be made, but there is a slight hitch. His daughter Courtney is getting married the following weekend, so it's kind of a busy week for the whole family. Courtney actually shoos him out the door, saying, "Mom and I will take care of wedding stuff. You go." Kevin packs up some food and water, loads up his radios and GPSs, and heads for the mountains. Kevin's presence is a godsend, not only because he brings a lot of experience and volunteers with him, but also because he understands what the Hawkins family is experiencing. He explains the process and calms a lot of their fears. And when he tells them that he truly understands what they're going through, the Hawkins know he truly means it. He is not just blowing smoke. And because of what the Bardsleys went through the summer before, Summit County paid attention and now has a core of experienced searchers and technical expertise ready to mobilize in the event of another missing child. Brennan is the first on the receiving end of those lessons learned. Heidi, Kevin, and Wally all say Garrett has played a big role in making sure another kid didn't end up like him. Brennan Hawkins is found on the 4th day, 5 miles away and uphill from where he went missing. Kevin says, "I would like to think that Garrett was on the mountain that day that Brennan went missing." Not to mention the fact that because of that search taking place, another scout that was on the mountain who was having serious heart problems was able to be taken to a hospital quickly because there were helicopters already in the area. In August of 2005, so 1 year after Garrett went missing, the Bardsleys organized another search in hopes of finding Garrett's remains. Heidi didn't think Garrett would be found, but she knew that she had to try. Their job, she said, was to do as much as they possibly could. The rest, they trusted to God. She was right. Garrett did not come home. But so many other good things, some might call them miracles, have come from Garrett's search that she and Kevin say it's not a loss. Everything that they have endured so far brought forth blessings to so many lives that have been changed. They know he has saved at least 2 other scouts, and Heidi thinks that they haven't even seen the full extent of his influence yet. Heidi says she thinks that Garrett has touched more lives this way than he would have if he had just lived a regular full life. Garrett's family and the scouts would return once more to the Mirror Lake trailhead in the high Uintas, the same place Garrett was lost. That's where Cameron receives his Eagle Scout Award, which is the highest achievement or rank attainable in the Boy Scouts that only 4% of scouts ever achieve. And since Garrett was working toward that same goal, he was honored with the Spirit of the Eagle, an award for scouts who were working toward their eagle but died before it could be completed. Heidi and Kevin occasionally visit that lake, the lake where Kevin last saw their son, and they appreciate the sacred feeling that the area holds for them. And though it's technically a nameless lake, they and others have named it for a young man whose spirit still lingers. In their mind, it's Garrett's Lake, and it will always be Garrett's Lake. In the afternoon of Saturday, May 2nd, 1959, Judy Bolches is a 6-year-old girl out with her family for a picnic and hike in the Rampart Range under the shadow of Devil's Head. Judy, her stepfather, and her little brother start off on a trail hike when Judy changes her mind and decides to head back to where her mom is. Dad says, "That's fine," and Judy turns around and heads back down the trail. But she never makes it back to her mom. When the boys get back to the picnic and figure out that Judy's not there, they search the trail for a while, but don't waste a whole lot of time before going for help. By that evening, hundreds of searchers, sheriff deputies, game wardens, forest rangers, and 2 dog teams have joined the effort. But again, the dogs can't pick up the scent. They search by land and by air late into the night, grab a couple hours of sleep, and are back at it hard early the next morning. That same morning, campers along the South Platte River, waking up to a chilly morning where temperatures have dipped into the 40s overnight. They're a little surprised when a little girl with no shoes, no coat, and no shirt comes wandering into camp with a cheery "Good morning." The campground Judy wanders into is 12 miles away from where she went missing 18 hours earlier. What did Judy have to say about her ordeal?
I didn't cry, but I got a little cold. I wasn't afraid, and I slept a little.
And apparently, she took off her shoes because they were hurting her feet. Her mom said that except for some scratches on her arms, Judy appeared to be just fine. So, Judy must have been hoofing it to get 12 miles in 18 hours, right? Well, get this. Judy had rheumatic fever, which severely weakened her heart. She was in no condition to hurry anywhere. I mean, I don't think I could get 12 miles in 18 hours in the rough, rocky, off-trail terrain that she navigated. How did she do it? I guess the devil wasn't hungry that day. Or maybe Judy's just one of the very few people who have actually played with the devil and lived. Word of warning, I do not speak one word of Norwegian, so I apologize in advance if I mispronounce any of these places or names. Norway has a royal family, and they're pretty popular with the Norwegian people. But in the 1990s, the people elected a new royal family, at least temporarily, led by two brothers, Kjetil and Vegard Ulvang. See, there's not a whole lot going on in Norway except cross-country skiing, and it is as popular of a sport there as football is in the US. If you look at the cumulative Olympic medal totals for cross-country skiing for each country, Norway rules. It's not even close. But in the 70s and 80s, Olympic gold medals were few and far between. That is until the 1992 Winter Olympic Games in Albertville, France. Vegard was the brother actually on the skis, but Kjetil, an accomplished skier and athlete in his own right, was a trained and certified physical therapist for the Norwegian Olympic ski teams. So the brothers went to Albertville together. By the time the games were over, Vegard and his teammate Bjorn Dali had each won 3 golds and a silver medal for a total of 8 between them. That's 6 of Norway's 9 gold medals and 8 of Norway's 20 medals total just from these two guys. Vegard came home in style on a plane that Scandinavian Airlines rechristened Vegard the Viking in his honor, a nickname that has stuck with him to this day. And seemingly overnight, the entire Ulvang family is elevated to hometown hero status by all of Norway. But the Ulvangs are far from real royalty. Kjetil was born in 1961 to parents Arn and Ingrid. He was followed by his brother Vegard in 1963 and another brother, Morten, in 1965. The family lived in Kirkenes, Norway, where Arn and Ingrid were teachers at the Kirkenes High School and taught their 3 boys the importance of being physically fit. Kirkenes is way in the northern regions of Norway and only about 5 miles from the border with Russia. It's actually located within the Arctic Circle. So they see winter from September to May with not a ton of snow since their temperatures are probably a bit tempered by being on the coast of the Barents Sea, but it's certainly enough to ski on. So from the time they can strap skis on their feet, all 3 Ulvang brothers could be seen skiing around the Kirkenes area. And these guys are tough. They run or ski day or night, which is good because the winter months that far north are mostly dark. If you want to ski in the winter, you either have to go to a ski park that has lights or strap a light on your head. So that's what they do. And a 10-mile run in the winter with wind and snow is a regular day at the office for these guys. They are truly a different breed of athlete. Kjetil and Vegard are super tight. With a shared passion for skiing, they are not only brothers, but best friends. But they don't do everything together. Vegard is kind of this larger than life adventure seeker, while Kjetil is more content to stay home, finding his joy in his professional calling of physical therapy. Not that the brothers don't adventure together occasionally. Vegard has this thing about mountains. Probably because there's nothing taller than 1,000 feet in his neighborhood and nothing over 7,000 feet in all of Norway. And he's climbed a good number of the big ones. In the summer of 1990, Kjetil, Vegard, and another friend, Pierre Gay-Perret, who is an experienced mountain climber who had guided Vegard up other daunting slopes, they all traveled to Alaska to summit Denali, a 20,000 foot or 6,100 meter climb. Gay-Perret had done the same climb solo 3 years earlier and was a little worried about the Ulvang boys' ability to complete this summit. But using standard Ulvang grit and determination, they made the summit in 11 days using the route most people use to climb Denali. But on the way down, they took a less traveled route. And after 7 days of hiking down, they were attempting to cross a frozen lake on skis. Now, they knew there was a danger of the ice being too thin. It was summer in Alaska. So they would use an ice hatchet to check the thickness every couple hundred feet. At one point, Kjetil got out in front of the other two by about 50 feet when the ice gave way, sending Kjetil into the frigid water with no way to pull himself out. He calmly took off his skis and laid them across the opening to give himself something he could put his arms up on, something for him to lean on and support him while he waited to be rescued. And Vegard tied himself to Pierre and started to move out onto the ice in an attempt to reach Kjetil, but the ice gave way again, sending both Vegard and Pierre into the water as well. They're both able to scramble back to shore on their own. Then Pierre takes a shot at skiing out to Kjetil, but falls in again. After he gets himself out, Vegard ties a rope to a rock and tosses it out to Kjetil, who manages to get the rope around his arm. But while he's waiting for Vegard to pull him out, Pierre goes through the ice again. Vegard ends up pulling both of them out across and through the jagged ice. Pierre suffers from a few cuts, but after being in the near freezing water for almost 15 minutes, Kjetil is going into shock. And while Vegard stays with him to try to warm him, Pierre goes running for a small logging village not far away. And as he comes face to face with one of the residents, both his bleeding face and his frantic calls for help in a French accent probably took the resident a little by surprise. But Pierre manages to get his point across and park rangers are called. The rangers send a helicopter to get Kjetil, who, by the time help arrives, has been revived by Vegard and goes on to make a full recovery. That is one tough dude. This guy, Kjetil, is said to be in such great physical shape that he can run for up to 12 to 15 hours. How nuts is that? Which is also why his disappearance is such a mystery. In the fall of 1993, Vegard travels to the Dolomite Mountains in Italy to ramp up his training for the 1994 Olympics, which are being held in his home country in Lillehammer. By the way, just a side note here. Rumor has it that the youngest Ulvang brother, Morten, was the fastest skier of all the Ulvangs. But once he saw what his brother Vegard went through with his training regimen, Morten just kind of said, no thanks. So anyway, Vegard is gone to Italy. And on October 13th, Kjetil and Morten make plans to watch the Norway-Poland World Cup elimination soccer game on TV that night at Kjetil's house where he lives with his girlfriend, Trina. But first, Kjetil is spending the day with 2 other physiotherapists at a school not far away in Bugoynes, where they work with students on everything from proper posture to fitness training. As the 3 of them drive back to Kirkenes, they make a pit stop in Nijden, where Kjetil chats with a young skier and her father and give them a training program for her to follow. He gets back in the car, but gets out again at a place called Munkenessa. Now, if you search Google for Munkenessa, it'll show you a town on the southwestern coast of Norway. That's not it. But I found a Munkefjord around what would have been their route home. So, as near as I can tell, Kjetil gets out of the car somewhere in this area with a plan to run home. Keep in mind that he's starting about 15 miles from his house. But for him, that should be about a 2-hour run, which puts him home in plenty of time to watch the game with his brother. The wind is starting to blow, the snow is starting to fall, and the temperature is right around freezing. But this is a walk in the park for him. He literally grew up running all over this terrain. He knows it like the back of his hand. So he gets out of the car, straps on a belt to hold a water bottle. He's wearing a wool hat, a wool sweater under a windbreaker, full-length training pants, running shoes, and waterproof socks. Doesn't sound very warm for freezing temperatures, but when you're running, it's more than enough. And he starts running. And even though Kjetil is going to have to go up and over a roughly 1,000-foot rise in an area with no clear path, the people in the car just watch him go and then drive away because they know this is a walk in the park for him. Nobody's worried that Kjetil can't make this run. But when Morten shows up at his house later that evening to watch the game and Kjetil isn't there, he knows something is not right. Kjetil should have been home hours ago. Morten immediately calls his uncle and a friend, and the 3 of them go out to run Kjetil's most likely path home. And they find tracks that they're pretty sure must be Kjetil's, but after about a mile, they lose the trail. By now, it's like 9:30 at night, and the weather is really turning for the worse. So the searchers build a bonfire at the highest point in the area, hoping Kjetil will see it and head in their direction. But all is silent on the mountain. The next day, news that Kjetil, one of Norway's own favorite sons, is missing spreads like wildfire through Kirkenes, and hundreds of volunteers rally together to start a search, including Vegard, who drops everything he's doing in Italy and hops on a plane home to search for his missing brother and best friend. The whole Uvang family straps on their skis and covers countless miles, day and night, looking for any sign of Kjetil. And Norwegian officials pull out all the stops, sending 125 soldiers, volunteers, military helicopters equipped with FLIR, and trained canines to help search. Over 120 square miles of terrain is covered in multiple directions, turning up nothing. Police call off the official search after only 4 days because of the expense, which sounds super short, but that's actually double the normal time allotted for a missing person search. But as soon as the official search and rescue teams back off, Herbert Randall, president of the Kirkenes Ski Club, steps up. He organizes hundreds of volunteers and puts out a call for anyone who might have any knowledge of what happened to Kjetil. They get 90 phone calls from mediums and psychics claiming to see him, but none of the information they share leads to anything. For the next 12 days, donations of money and time pour in. At one point, 43 search dogs are in the field, and businesses are giving their employees time off with pay so they can join in on what becomes the largest ground search in the history of Norway at the time. But no one finds a thing. By the middle of November, daylight is down to just a couple of hours a day, and the search is ended since it's pretty much a given at this point that Kjetil is not going to be found alive. So the search ends, but the speculation is just beginning. There are a few reports from people saying that they saw a jogger along the road that night, and a taxi driver even goes so far as to say that the jogger he saw was wearing a belt with a water bottle. So maybe the weather gets bad enough in the hills that Kjetil decides to finish his run along the road instead. Vegard says it's possible, but it's pretty rare for anyone to run along that road. But if that's the case, that leads us to a much darker tangent to the theory. Because of Kirkenes's close proximity to Russia and its location effectively on the coast of the Barents Sea, Kirkenes is a popular destination for smugglers and bootleggers. Is it possible that Kjetil has either seen something he shouldn't, or maybe even just got hit by a car on its way to the coast to deliver goods bound for the Russian black market? Well, if so, whomever these smugglers are, they can't afford to be either identified to the police or caught up in an accident investigation. So they would probably just ditch Kjetil's body. It's possible. For Vegard, this has to be the right track. This or some other outside influence. Because the idea that Kjetil lost his way in the snow and fell into a lake or something is inconceivable. Kjetil has traversed that ridge 100 times. They've run over every rock on that ground, usually in the dark. And Kjetil was as tough as they come. So even if he did fall and get hurt or something, he's the kind of guy who would drag himself 5 miles to get help. I mean, we've already seen him deal with falling in a frigid lake for 15 minutes and survive like a boss. So for Vegard, there is just no plausible scenario of any kind of trouble that Kjetil could run into that he couldn't handle. Just not in the realm of possibility. But whether it's possible or not possible makes no difference. Kjetil is nowhere to be found. After 3 weeks of searching with his family and friends, Vegard returns to Italy to resume his training for the '94 Olympics, which are now only 3 months away. When a reporter asks him how his training is going, he says, "It's strange. For an athlete, the Olympics mean having a deep concern about the small details of his physique. Small muscles, small sore throats, small blisters, small aches. I was here in Italy concentrating completely on these details when I heard about Kjetil. I went home, and for those 3 weeks, I didn't think for 1 second about the Olympics or the details of my physique. In truth, at that time, the games became such a lesser event in my life that they didn't exist at all." And whether it's the interruption of his training or just the complete mental, physical, and emotional toll of his brother still being missing, the cost is evident in the games at Lillehammer in February of '94. Vegard only comes home with 1 bronze medal. Not exactly what he and Norway were hoping for. And that was the last Olympics he would compete in. Spring finally arrives in Kirkenes, and in June, the military takes to the air again with new searches aimed at least bringing Kjetil home to his family. And it doesn't take long for searchers to spot Kjetil's red jacket. Authorities recover Kjetil's body from a shallow lake about 5 miles from where they expected his path would take him, which makes absolutely no sense. Since Morten knew exactly where to start looking for Kjetil, it is apparent that although there's no real trail across the mountain, Kjetil must have had a favorite route. And this run was not a training opportunity. This was just Kjetil grabbing a chance to get in a quick run before sitting down with Morten in front of the TV for the evening. And add the poor weather on top of things, it seems pretty unlikely that Kjetil would have strayed too far off of his regular route. And knowing the terrain as well as he did, it also seems unlikely that if he did get off track, that it would take him 5 miles to figure it out and get back on track. The coroner says the cause of death may have been hypothermia. What does that mean? Obviously, there are no apparent wounds to take investigators in the direction of foul play, but they should at least be able to tell with a little bit more certainty if Kjetil died of hypothermia or not. But we can speculate until the cows come home. Doesn't really matter, because nothing changes the fact that Kjetil is dead and no one has any idea why. But unlike the usual phrase, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, this time the Lord taketh away and the Lord giveth. Remember I said that Kjetil lived with his girlfriend? It's only after he goes missing that Trine finds out she's pregnant. And 7 months later, all in the span of the same week, Kjetil is found on Sunday. In Jorgen, Kjetil's 9-pound baby boy is born on Tuesday, just in time to bury his father on Friday. The adventure begins. That's the text Sharon McGrogan receives about 10:30 a.m. at her house in Northwest Indiana, the morning of March 14th, 2014. The text is from her husband, Jim, and is a signal to her that he and his 2 friends, who've planned their trip to Vail, Colorado for over a year, are finally standing at the start of the trail at 8:30 a.m. their time to begin their weekend of hiking, snowboarding, and hanging with each other. But that's the last text she will ever receive from her husband. Jim McGrogan is a 39-year-old emergency physician from Chesterton, Indiana, with an adoration of the outdoors. He is an avid skier, snowboarder, hiker, anything related to the outdoors, and was even known to run a triathlon or 2. Or 3. So he sets off from Indiana on his way to Colorado. Since he's flying, he leaves his own snow equipment at home and makes a stop at a rental shop in Denver to gear up. He rents something called a split board, which is a snowboard that can split into 2 pieces that can be strapped on as skis. And for those split skis, he rents skins. Those are covers for the split skis that allow you to cross-country ski uphill. Basically, they let you move forward, but not backward. He also rents an avalanche probe, an avalanche beacon, a shovel, and a helmet. Add that to the cell phone, extra cell phone battery, GPS, medical kit, food, water, and a sleeping bag that he already has in his pack. I think it's safe to say he's doing a bang-up job of covering all the safety basics. He is a seasoned outdoorsman who has also had training in avalanche survival. I think he's pretty qualified for this hike. Their hike starts at Spraddle Creek Trailhead, where it's a leisurely 9-mile meandering hike that climbs about 3,000 feet with several rest stops along the way until you get to Eisenman Hut, a nice little place for hikers and skiers to rest up, eat, and get ready for their adventures. So the 3 guys start their hike, and about 2 hours in, they've already covered 4 miles. And in this terrain in winter, that's pretty aggressive. Jim's companions are like, dude, we need to rest for a while. And despite explicitly promising his wife he would never leave the group, Jim says, fine, you rest. I'll meet you up at the next rest stop. But when they get to the next rest stop, Jim's not there. Now, leaving the group shouldn't really have been a big deal. The path they're on has a ton of traffic on it, and it's very well worn and packed down. Plus, the drifts on either side are anywhere from 3 feet to 8 feet tall. It is nearly impossible to not see where this trail goes. But stop after stop, no sign of Jim. By the time his friends make it to Eisenman Hut with no one having seen him, they call the authorities and report Jim is missing. The hunt for Jim begins immediately. Colorado Search and Rescue doesn't mess around and have a good success rate to prove it. And this search is huge. Everyone is involved. Vail Mountain Search and Rescue, Eagle County Sheriff's Department, Colorado Army National Guard, Rocky Mountain Rescue, Alpine Rescue, search and rescue teams from Larimer, Summit, and Grand counties, and the Salvation Army. That's a lot of well-trained searchers. Over the next 5 days, these searchers would head out on foot and on snowmobiles, and would add 3 helicopters from the nearby National Guard High Altitude Aviation Training Site for good measure. But by Tuesday, March 18th, bad weather forces the search to be suspended. They spend more than 1,000 hours scouring an 18 square mile area, but never find a trace until 3 weeks later. On April 3rd, a call is placed to Vail Public Safety from 3 skiers who have discovered a body just over a mile and a half up from Booth Trailhead at Booth Falls. Vail Mountain Rescue recovers the body, which is later determined to be that of Jim McGrogan. At the time of his recovery, he's wearing his helmet, black leggings, blue shirt with a black undershirt, and black and gray socks. Searchers also find his backpack. In it are his coat and ski pants, working cell phone, and there is cell service in the area, spare battery, working GPS, and working avalanche beacon, along with all of the other survival supplies he had left with. Now, it certainly is not uncommon for a person to get separated from their group and then get lost in the wilderness. That's why search and rescue teams have jobs. He could have gotten further off the trail than he thought he was, and in an effort to find his way back home, slipped and fell down the frozen waterfalls at Booth Falls. His injuries consisted of massive head trauma, even under his helmet, a broken right leg, and injuries to the right side of his chest, all consistent with a fall from a great distance. Case closed, right? Not even close. I don't even know where to start with the oddities on this one. So let's just dive in. The area where he's found is 4.5 miles from where he was last seen on the trail. However, this equates to a hike of 12 to 14 miles off trail through the snow to actually get there. The hiking trail he was on is impossible to leave without leaving big tracks in the snow, which from the air would stick out like a sore thumb in the surrounding virgin snow. Before the snow fell 5 days after he's missing, there are no tracks visible anywhere off the trail. The area where he's found, Booth Falls, has been searched multiple times with no sign of him. Well, okay, he's not there in the first 5 days of searching because he's hiking over from Eisenman Hut, or at least from the trail leading to the hut, right? Well, to make that 12 to 14 mile hike in 8 feet of snow with 30-foot snow drifts, he would have had to climb thousands of feet and descended thousands of feet, possibly several times depending on where he started from, and crossed either Middle Creek or Spraddle Creek, again depending on where he started from, in the winter, just to get to the Booth Creek area. Wow, doesn't seem likely. Then there's the trauma to his body, totally consistent with a fall from a pretty big height. But he wasn't found at the base of Booth Falls. He's found a decent distance downstream from the falls, far enough that had he slipped off of the falls, he wouldn't have been able to crawl there by himself with those injuries. The actual spot where he is found has no cliffs or anything anywhere around, so no places of great height where he would have needed to fall from to sustain those catastrophic injuries. And where are his boots? His snowboard is recovered in the general area of his body, and it's not uncommon if somebody falls from a great height that they lose their shoes or their boots. But his boots are never found. Some people might say he took them off while suffering from late-stage hypothermia. Maybe. I mean, he wasn't wearing his jacket either. But the temperatures were not that frigid during those 3 weeks. According to the Eagle County Regional Airport Station, daytime highs are in the 40s and 50s, probably a little cooler on the mountain. Coming from Minnesota myself, I can tell you that if you're hiking in spring in 40-degree weather, taking your coat off is not uncommon. But the boots, where are the boots? He couldn't have gone anywhere, either walking, skiing, or snowboarding, without the boots. And why would he leave the trail at all? Did he make it to Eisenman Hut, get tired of waiting for his friends, and decide to head off on his own? Seems like an experienced outdoorsman like himself would have seen the lack of wisdom in that idea. Maybe he opts to take a little side hike while he's waiting and gets lost. Well, no one at the top even saw him, so there's no evidence that he even made it to the hut. Maybe he tries to take a shortcut and gets lost. Very possible. Except at some point he has to know he's lost. There is a 16-second call from his phone in the afternoon of the 14th, but it doesn't go anywhere, and the phone is never used again. But he has every piece of survival gear he needs to either get himself off that mountain or alert someone who can. Why not use any of it? And if we buy the theory that he hiked the 12 to 14 miles east to Booth Falls, he's thousands of feet above the city. He can see Vail as he's hiking. So if he's lost, why not hike south to safety? And if he dies from a fall, how does that happen when there's no place to fall from? So what happened to Dr. Jim McGrogan? I have no idea. But it seems highly improbable that this entire episode is one gigantic accident. And it seems equally improbable that he ever left that trail voluntarily. But whatever force plucked him off that trail that day and dropped him at Booth Falls will most likely never be known. In the early 1960s, Tom and his friends Sid, Al, and Joe got together to go on a hunting trip together. Little did they know, this was the start of an annual tradition that would span 55 years. These guys were so tight that they even went in together to buy a hunting lodge as a home base for their yearly expedition. Now, Tom was about as all-American as they come. After starting his adult life as a paratrooper for the 82nd Airborne in the 1950s, he settled down around Troy, New York, married his sweetheart Beverly in 1959, and had 3 sons. By the time the annual hunting trip came around in 2015, he and Beverly had already passed their 56th wedding anniversary. But the years were certainly starting to catch up with Tom. When he was in his 20s, he had an accident with some gunpowder that left him with 159 stitches in his hand and a blind eye. Not a huge deal, but by 2015, Tom is now 82 years old, and the eyesight in the remaining eye wasn't so good anymore. Neither was his hearing, and neither was his heart. But he can still get around reasonably well, and with the help of family and friends, he's able to do pretty much everything he's always done. But right before the 2015 hunting trip, he comes down with shingles and seriously thinks about not going on the trip. But when the time comes, he decides he's recovered enough and feels pretty good. So he goes on the hunting trip like he has every fall for 55 years. And it's not like they're out camping in the woods. I mean, they have this nice cabin to stay in, and his son's going to be there too. And this year, there are 7 people total in their group, which includes his son, Rob. They load up sometime in early November, hit the road for the 70-mile trip north from Troy, New York to the cabin, which is around Hague, New York. Sunday, November 15th, Sid tells the group that he heard about some state hunting land not far from them around Lily Pond that doesn't see a lot of traffic. And it's not that far, it's just a few miles down the road, so maybe they should head on over there for the afternoon and see if they can find some deer. Easy peasy. So that's what they do. They hop in their cars and head on over. It's about noon when they get there, and the boys have a plan. Since 4 of the 7 hunters are of advanced age, the younger members set up a drive, which is a pretty common hunting tactic. The idea is that the older folks station themselves about 150 feet in from the road and about 300 feet from each other in a line. They're the watchers. Then the 3 younger guys walk around in a wide path and they circle back in the direction of the watchers with the idea that they drive any deer ahead of them as they go right to the watchers. Fish in a barrel. This allows the older guys, all in their 80s, to sit while the younger ones expend all the energy. So the old guys walk into the woods to take up their positions. Tom was the last one in the line of 4 and the furthest away from their cars, but one of the younger guys in the group walked him to his spot. The plan is to either shoot some deer, or if they don't see any deer, they meet back at the cars around 2 o'clock. Tom walked into those woods wearing a green camel coat and pants and his decades-old red and black checked hat sitting squarely on his head. He carried a 30-30 shotgun with extra rounds and a walkie-talkie. In fact, they all had walkie-talkies, all set to the same channel. Not seeing any deer, or any other wildlife for that matter, when 2 p.m. rolls around, everyone meets back at the cars, except Tom. They call him on the walkie-talkie. No response. 2 of the guys walk over to where they had left him, and he's nowhere around. So they start fanning out to look for him. Couldn't have gotten far, and even though all he had to do was pretty much stand up and turn around to see the road behind him where they came from, well, maybe he just got a little mixed up and headed in the wrong direction. But they can't find anything. They even fire 3 shots in the air, which is like the universal hunting signal for trouble. But they hear no shots in return. And it doesn't take long for the men to realize that they have a real problem on their hands. So one of them heads into town to alert the DNR, or the Department of Natural Resources, that they have a missing hunter. And by 4:30 that afternoon, rangers are on the scene organizing a search. By 7:30 p.m., it's dark out, and searchers drive trucks with all their lights on up and down the service road that leads to Lily Pond, honking their horns to try to show Tom the way. Nothing. Rob, Tom's son, calls his mom and lets her know, "Hey, Dad's missing, but don't worry, we'll find him soon." Beverly's response, "I'm on my way." But that's what everyone thought. We'll find him soon. This should be such an easy search. Tom can't go very far on his own. And if he did wander off and get lost, well, he had been teaching hunting and survival skills for years, so he should be able to take care of himself until searchers can find him. But they don't find him. And even the DNR officers are perplexed. They assume that since they're looking for a man in his 80s, this is going to be a quick search. Either he wandered away, in which case he can't go very far very fast, or they're going to find him dead due to some medical event. After a quick initial search that turns up nothing, they know something's not right and call for reinforcements. Over 50 agencies and upwards of 300 people a day show up to search for Tom, and authorities pull out all the stops. They had people, dogs, divers, helicopters equipped with FLIR, you name it. The search was so big that locals were wondering if this was some politician's nephew or something. Gotta be somebody important. Interestingly enough, on the 5th day of the search, 2 FBI agents who were with the New York Police Special Operations Response Team, they show up. Huh. That doesn't happen very often. Feds usually only show up when there is suspicion of a crime that happened on federal land or when their assistance is requested. But none of the authorities running Tom's search asked for their help. Tom's wife, Beverly, says, basically, they were there to tell me that he's now considered a missing person, and they felt that something was definitely not right. But unless and until they made a recovery, they wouldn't know what it was. The people on the ground set up a grid search where they pick a section, draw lines on either end, those are called bump lines, and then go through sections basically shoulder to shoulder looking for anything. Once the line of searchers has gone from one bump line to the other, the area is cordoned off with string so they know it's been searched and everybody moves to the next section. Searchers say they went over some sections so many times that the forest looked like a big spider web of strings. Hampered by heavy rain on many of the search days, they eventually cover over 4 square miles of forest this way and many more by air. And the bloodhounds that authorities brought in to track Tom, they couldn't pick up a scent at all. The official search ends 11 days later on Thanksgiving Day, November 26th. And that was the day that Beverly, who had never left the command post the entire time the search was happening, decides it's time for her to go home. People continue to search, though, eventually covering over 8,000 acres or over 12 square miles from the spot where Tom was last seen. And they even check all of the areas surrounding ponds and lakes and caves and any other areas that should have been inaccessible. No trace of Tom is ever found. No bones, no clothes, no walkie-talkie, not even his gun. So what the hell happened to Tom? Well, let's look at some of the options. As much as I hate to say it, hunting accidents happen all the time. But these guys knew their gun safety rules inside and out. And all of the older guys were sitting in a line with the others off to their left or their right, looking straight ahead at the hill in front of them, because that's where the deer should be coming from. It's not likely that one of them turned a full 90 degrees to one side or the other to accidentally shoot Tom. Or maybe there was an accidental discharge at some other point. Doesn't matter. Why would anyone hide an accident? And even if you did, it'd be pretty tough to get everyone to go along with the story, and even tougher for all of them to fool the New York Bureau of Criminal Investigation, or BCI. Obviously, the first questions go to the other 6 people who were with him. They're all questioned by the New York BCI investigators, who find no reason to suspect any of them of anything. But let's stay on the subject of foul play for a moment. If none of Tom's hunting buddies have anything to do with Tom's being missing, what about somebody else? Beverly says the only other reason she can think of that Tom would disappear is that maybe somebody else came in on a 4-wheeler or something and just took him. But this theory doesn't really work. Remember that the 4 watchers are all seated just a couple hundred feet away from each other and only about 150 feet from the road. More than close enough to hear each other if someone called for help. Keep in mind, this was in November, so most of the leaves had fallen from the trees, making any sounds even easier to hear. So if someone were to drive in there, either in a car or a 4-wheeler, someone would have heard it. And assuming they could silently incapacitate Tom, they would still have to drag him back to either a car or a 4-wheeler without making a sound. Not likely. There's also an interesting idea that maybe Tom was never in those woods, that something else happened to him somewhere else, and his buddies made up the hunting story to cover their tracks. Well, considering the complete lack of anything in the woods where he supposedly sat for 2 hours, this, on its face, sounds plausible. But then again, why? Tom didn't have any real money to speak of, and everybody loved the guy. So there's no real motive to get rid of him. And if it wasn't murder, just some kind of accident, why cover it up? Is it possible that Tom was attacked by an animal? Maybe. Half of New York State's population of black bears live in Adirondack State Park, and where Tom and his crew were hunting is inside the eastern border of that park. But black bears tend to shy away from people and wouldn't be likely to attack somebody who's just sitting there minding his own business. What about mountain lions? Well, again, possible. The New York Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC, says there are no mountain lions in New York, but there are plenty of eyewitnesses who will tell you otherwise. But the problem with this theory is the same as the foul play theory. Somebody would have heard something. Most people generally don't stay silent when being attacked by an animal. Not to mention that even if we say, okay, he was attacked and then dragged away somewhere, his gun would still be left at the scene. And wherever this animal dragged him to eat him wouldn't be all that far. A predator is not going to drag its prey for 5 miles. So wherever that predator stopped to enjoy its dinner, there would be remains left over, including a lot of blood. It's pretty rare that not a single bone is left, not to mention clothing and a walkie-talkie, with an animal attack. But none of these things are ever found. It is not necessarily uncommon for a person to want to leave this world on their own terms. So the idea has been floated that maybe Tom's declining health led him to make the decision that he was done here and wanted to move on to the next plane of existence. But no one ever mentions anything about Tom being depressed or suicidal. In fact, with the help and encouragement of his friends and family, he was still doing pretty much everything he wanted to do. And he didn't just walk off into the woods by himself. He couldn't have gotten far enough for searchers to not find him. So that would mean he would have to convince at least one of his friends to go along with his plan. And I could see maybe one of his 3 lifelong friends going along with it, maybe staging a hunting accident. But there wasn't a hunting accident. There's no body. So this plan would have then necessitated someone hiding Tom's body. But his closest friends, they're all in their 80s as well, so they're in no condition to be dragging a body around in the forest, which means that you would have had to convince one of the younger guys. However, the younger guys are probably a lot less likely to go along with this plan, especially Tom's son, Rob. Not to mention that if this were the plan, why would you pick a plan where you had to hide a body? Why not just stage a hunting accident? So, if we've run out of the normal explanations, that leaves us with the not so normal explanations. And this case does have some unexplainable elements to it. First and foremost, the fact that neither Tom's body nor anything else he brought with him was ever found. It's pretty abnormal right there. Most people do not disappear literally without a trace. But there's more. Remember when I mentioned earlier that not only did the men not see any deer that day, but they didn't see anything else either? No wildlife at all. Now again, this is November, so all kinds of animals, from squirrels to chipmunks to birds, should have been scurrying around getting ready for the winter months ahead. Those woods should have been teeming with activity, but none of them saw or heard anything. It's not just the guys in the hunting party that mentioned the lack of life in the woods, but the searchers do too, with several of them noting the strange quiet in the area. And this is interesting to me because whether we're talking about an ordinary predator or a cryptid of some kind, it's common for the animals in the area to make themselves scarce to hopefully stay off said predator's lunch menu. But once that threat is gone, life usually returns to normal. So for both the hunting party and the searchers to mention the same eerie stillness, that means that stillness remains for at least a couple of days. That's weird. Also, Sid said he heard a strange noise, a noise that he says that he's never heard before in his 55 years of being an outdoorsman. He said it sounded like it came from in front of them from the hill about 150 feet or so. He said it was quick and that it's really hard to describe, but that it kind of sounded metallic, maybe like the sound of a trap closing. He thought it was odd and out of place enough to mention it to the police when they interviewed him. When asked whether or not investigators ever followed up on that detail, Sid said, "Yeah, I told them that, but they just passed it off, you know?" But to me, what might be the biggest red flag is the lack of noise coming from Tom. The Lore Lodge did a documentary on this case called Into Thin Air, where they went to the area and ran a quick little experiment on how far noise can travel in those woods. And I'll put a link to that video in the description. What did they find out? Even at the height of summer, with tons of leaves around to deaden the sound, at a distance of 300 feet away from each other, they are still able to hear each other when talking barely above their regular conversation levels. So any noise Tom made would most likely have been heard, if not by everyone, at least by Joe, the one closest to Tom. But nobody heard a thing. Another side facet to the strangeness of this case is that on day 10 of the search for Tom, some of the DEC Rangers are pulled off of this search and sent about 40 miles south to Schuylerville to search for another missing man, Fred, or Fritz, Drum. Fritz, who's 68, and his wife live on 170 acres of land. And on the morning of Tuesday, November 24th, Fritz's wife is out at a breakfast meeting and comes home to an empty house. Fritz's car is still in the driveway, so she figures he must have just gone for a walk. But he never comes home. And no trace of Fritz is ever found either. So what are the chances of two older men, both familiar with the forest, disappearing only 40 miles apart from one another and only 10 days apart? In my opinion, astronomical. So what are we left with? Well, not much, except Willie, Tom's yellow lab, who at least as of 2019 was still sitting in the kitchen window every day, waiting for his best friend Tom to come home. Dr. Christopher Robert was the achiever most of us only wish we could be. After spending time as a firefighter and a paramedic, he decides to go back to school and get a degree in anesthesiology. He moves to Minnesota for his residency at the University of Minnesota and then takes a job at the Hennepin County Medical Center and never leaves. After 8 years there, he becomes the chief of anesthesiology in 2011. And between he and his wife, who works as an emergency room doctor at Children's Hospital in St. Paul, they're comfortable enough to afford, in addition to the family home they share with their 2 children, a condo in downtown Minneapolis that Christopher often uses to be closer to his job. On December 4th, 2015, his department decides to celebrate the holidays early with a party at the Libertine Bar in the uptown area of Minneapolis. Christopher leaves the bar a little after midnight to start his 2-mile walk home to the condo downtown. And no one describes him as being drunk. At 7:45 the next morning, police receive a 911 call reporting a body on the side of I-94 near the Groveland Bridge, and it is identified as being that of Christopher Robert. He has suffered blunt force trauma to the head, but the officers investigating the scene quickly rule out a hit and run. Instead, they say the injury looks like it came from a fall, and he could have taken Groveland Avenue to get from uptown to downtown, way out of his way, but it's possible. That route would have taken him over the highway. But he must not have been found under the bridge because the statement from the police admits they have no idea where he fell from. Weird, But here's the real kicker. The autopsy report lists the time of death as 7:30 a.m., so right before he's found. The report also states the level of alcohol in his system is significant, so certainly not zero. But a guy Christopher's size would have to have been wasted when he left the bar in order to stagger around for 7 hours and still have a significant amount left in his system when he dies at 7:30. And no one at the party says he was drunk. And where was he for 7 hours? And how did he come to rest on a highway embankment with nothing overhead for him to fall from? Police say he fell from somewhere, but no one knows where that somewhere is. Maurice Damitz, Doc to his friends, had devoted his entire life to God. His friends called him Doc because he had a doctorate in theology, and his contributions to both his residential community and his spiritual community are just too many to go into. But he was also a member of the American Federation of Mineral Societies and the Flatirons Gem and Mineral Club. Because another thing that he loved, gem hunting. In 1981, Doc was counting his blessings of 84 years of life, including 51 years of marriage to his wife, Myrtle. But it wasn't exactly a carefree life. At 84, Doc now has a blood disorder requiring medication and arthritis in his knees, making walking a little tricky. Fortunately for him, Doc had a good friend, David McSherry, that also loved gem hunting, and the two would often go out on day-long expeditions together. And over time, they had developed a routine for their adventures. David would pick Doc up, and they would head out from Longmont, where Doc lived, and head about 60 miles south to the Devil's Head area of the Rampart Mountains, where topaz is all over the place. And on April 29th, 1981, that is exactly what they did. Now, the usual routine for them is that they would pick an area to hunt for the day. David would help Doc to a spot where there may be one or two places for him to dig at, where he didn't have to move around a whole lot. Make sure Doc was all set, and then David would pick his own dig site not far away. The men would dig for a few hours, and then David would help Doc back to the car, and they would go back home. And April 29th was no different. Doc and David get to the area around the Topaz Point picnic area, which is literally in the shadow of Devil's Head. David helps Doc to a spot where he has a couple of dig sites close by and then finds his own dig site about 150 feet away, well within shouting distance should Doc need anything. Around 3 or 3:30 that afternoon, David goes over to Doc and lets him know that it's probably about time to pack it up and for the two of them to head home. He goes back to his site to pack up his gear and heads back over to Doc's spot about 3:45 to help him back to the car. But Doc isn't there, and neither is his backpack of mining tools. This area that they're in has a lot of big trees, but not much ground cover, so it's not super easy to hide. But David just thinks to himself, well, maybe he's just walked behind a tree to answer the call of nature since we're about to get back into the car for a couple hours. So he waits for a few minutes. Nothing. David finally feels the first pangs of panic and starts calling for Doc and honking the horn. Still nothing. A group of motorcyclists come around and David flags them down and asks for their help. So the guys on motorcycles start combing the area looking for Doc. David also flags down someone passing in a car and enlists their help as well. But after over 2 hours with no sign of Doc, the motorist volunteers to head into town to get help. It's almost 8:45 before a Douglas County Sheriff's Department deputy arrives, who immediately calls the Arapahoe Search and Rescue Team. By 11:45, searchers with bloodhounds are beginning their search of the area. And David tells them all that none of this makes any sense. He and Doc have been to this area over 50 times, so they are more than familiar with the terrain, and Doc can hardly walk. There's no way he is walking out of this valley on his own. The searching is pretty tough with all of the trees and the steep hillsides, and for whatever reason, the search dogs are unable to pick up a scent. After a week of searching turns up absolutely nothing, the search has ended. Doc and all of his tools have just vanished. The only sign that he was even there is the disturbed ground where he had been digging. No signs of a struggle and no blood anywhere around. And even if Doc had been attacked by an animal, David is only 150 feet away, well within earshot. Weeks turn into months, and on July 18th, 1981, Doc's wife Myrtle writes to Governor Richard Lamb asking for his help, saying that she believes that Doc may have met foul play or have been carried out of the area. Governor Lamb extends his condolences, but not his resources. Doc is officially declared dead in 1990, and in the 40 years since his seeming evaporation, not a trace of his fate has ever been uncovered. So what could have happened to Doc? Well, there are a couple of theories. It could be foul play like his wife believes, but by who? If it was a stranger, surely David, being just a little ways away, would have heard something. Could it be David? Sure. He would have had to figure out a way to hide Doc's body well enough to elude all the searchers and the dogs. Not likely. Or maybe he killed Doc somewhere else, disposed of the body, and then headed out to Devil's Head to make it seem like they were there the whole time. But why? They were friends for years, and David didn't seem to have anything to gain. Or, given his health conditions, could Doc have decided to wander off in the woods to give himself over to nature? It's possible, but if that was his plan, why wait until David had already given him a heads up that they're going to be leaving soon? Wouldn't you start wandering away as soon as you know your friend is safely at his own site, digging away where he won't be checking on you for hours? Not to mention the fact that suicide is little frowned upon in Christianity circles. So a man that devoted his entire life to God probably isn't likely to choose that path. At this point, 40 years later, I think it's safe to say that only the devil knows. Sending your kid to camp. An absolute rite of passage that is often harder on the parents than on the kids. But as a parent, I certainly have the expectation that if I send my kid to camp, that he'll at least come back. Jeff Hodgson's parents had the same expectation, and with good reason. But Jeff's camping trip sets new records in the FUBAR department and quickly earns the title of the trip from hell. This trip should have been abandoned about 12 hours after it got started. And I realize it's easy to play armchair quarterback, but let's go through this train wreck disaster by disaster. Jeff Hodgson is an 11-year-old in the summer of 1974 and signs up for a wilderness survival camping trip offered by the Department of Environmental Community Services of Idaho that would bus 11 kids, 4 paid DECS supervisors, and 1 volunteer, followed by a Jeep acting as their support vehicle driven by another volunteer from Pocatello, Idaho, to an area just south of the southern border of Craters of the Moon National Monument, where they would hike through an area around the Crystal Ice Caves. On Saturday, June 8th, 1974, 9 boys and 2 girls between the ages of 9 and 11 leave Pocatello, heading to Split Butte, about 10 miles southwest of the Crystal Ice Caves. As the group approaches the butte, the Jeep, the support vehicle, runs out of gas. The bus, still filled with kids, has to go back to the last gas station in American Falls, get gas for the Jeep, and go back to refuel it. This should have been a clue that this trip was going to be a tough one. Once the bus rescues the Jeep, they both head to an area 2 miles south of Split Butte and set up camp. The counselors divvy up enough dried food to last each kid for 6 days and tells them, put this in your pack and make sure you ration it evenly for the next 6 days. Each person also has a canteen of water and a blanket. The next day, Sunday, June 9th, the group spends the morning and afternoon going through various survival lessons, from how to catch small rodents in a trap, to finding a cave, to take cover from the heat if you ever get lost in the environment that they are in for this trip, namely blistering summer heat with daily temperatures over 100 degrees. By late afternoon on the first full day, the group has already started to run low on water. So they hike into the desert about 1.5 miles looking for a well or an oasis, but all they find is basically a big puddle with muddy, stale water. So the counselors make a new plan that the two support people will hike back to the Jeep and leave to go get more water and meet up with the group again the next day at an agreed upon rendezvous point. Meanwhile, the rest of the group is still so thirsty that they fill their water containers, drink the water, set up camp, and spend the night. The next morning, Monday, June 10th, the kids are split into 2 groups based on their hiking speed, and everyone leaves the Split Butte area to go meet the Jeep at the prearranged point. By noon, the group leaders figure out that they cannot find the rendezvous point. Now, as if a group of counselors lost in the desert with 11 kids and no water isn't bad enough, the supply jeep, filled with water and understandably in a hurry to get back to the campers, barrels 50 miles an hour down the rough desert road heading for the meeting point. Unfortunately, but almost predictably, the jeep hits a pothole or 2 that literally knocks the battery out of the car and into the dirt. The water supply lifeline is now a big paperweight back to the wandering campers. 2 of the 4 counselors decide to split from the group to see if they can locate the rendezvous point. The 2 remaining counselors decide to keep hiking with the kids looking for the supply truck. Temperatures at this time are near 100 degrees. As they trudge along, 1 counselor's in the front of the group and 1 in the rear. But 2 boys are lagging near the back of the group, 10-year-old Rocky Nelson and 11-year-old Jeff Hodgson. The longer the group walks, the further behind the 2 boys get. The last time a counselor can remember seeing them, they are a full 150 feet behind the group. Naturally, the trail has turns and hills, and around 5 p.m. that afternoon, they lose sight of the boys. 1 counselor, seeing the boys are no longer in sight, backtracks and finds Jeff's pack and what he assumes to be Jeff's prints going off trail from the pack. Now, there isn't any information as to what they did for the rest of that evening, but Tuesday morning around 9 a.m., one of the counselors goes back again to the area where Jeff and Rocky were last seen and ignites 2 large signal fires on top of a nearby butte. Unbeknownst to him and to everyone else in the group, Rocky has already found his way out of the desert and at around 10:30 a.m. that morning finds a farmer in the Minidoka area who brings him to authorities. The signal fires don't bring back Rocky and Jeff, but they do bring on the search and rescue teams. This is an assumption on my part, but not finding the hikers at the rendezvous point by Monday night must have spurred the volunteers to go get some official help. Because throughout the day on Tuesday, search and rescue teams managed to find and rejoin all of the different splinters and get them back together again at the Crystal Ice Caves. Rocky is interviewed by law enforcement and camp counselors and tells a fascinating story. According to Rocky, during one of the group's hiking breaks in the desert, he and Jeff get tired and fall asleep. When they both wake up and see the group far ahead of them, they both scream at the group, "Wait!" But apparently, nobody hears them. And the counselors never bother taking a head count to ensure that they have all of the kids with them. Rocky says that he and Jeff stay together until Rocky decides to hike out for help. But it's not clear why Jeff and Rocky didn't stick together or where exactly they parted ways. But regardless of the circumstances, search and rescue know they have a little boy alone in the desert with no water, and the search gets underway. At 10 p.m. Tuesday night, Mr. Hodgson is advised that his son is missing. The plan of attack to find Jeff is basically to throw everyone and everything into the desert to look. Every day, hundreds of people, both volunteers and professional searchers, form ground search teams who, along with the Civil Air Patrol, Air Force, tracking dogs, helicopters, and almost every other tool imaginable, leave the comfort of air conditioning and spend the day in the 100-degree heat looking for a lost 11-year-old boy. And as if that's not a disaster enough, we're not done with the disasters. On Friday, June 15th, one of the searchers, Shirley Egan, who was out in that 100-degree heat, collapses and dies. Of course, now everyone involved in the search takes a mental step back to reassess the situation, because now the search itself is taking lives. After 10 days, the search is ended, and Mr. Hodgson is pissed. He asks the governor to step in and send out some National Guard soldiers to search. However, no one with any authority believes that Jeff can survive that many days in that kind of heat with that little amount of water. Private groups and volunteers keep searching, but the formal searches are over. Now, for those of you who need a break from this endless string of disasters, I have just a small one for you. Tuesday, June 18th, a 25-year-old man named Anthony Sturm from a nearby city of Blackfoot has a dream that shows him exactly where Jeff's body is. He's not able to join the search until about noon Thursday, June 20th, but when he finally gets to the area, Anthony walks through the desert, a little less than a mile to the west and a mile and a half south to a large rock, where he finds Jeff's white straw hat, belt, boots, and socks. Jeff's body is lying at the base of that rock. The finding of Jeff stuns the search leaders, community, and his family, because he's found in an area that's been completely covered by foot patrol, horses, four-wheel drive vehicles, motorcycles, helicopters, dogs, and dozens of people. So how did all of these resources miss him? When asked how he managed to find Jeff when seemingly no one else could, Anthony said, "You have to believe in God. I'm not a religious man or a lunatic, but I do believe in God. If you do it in the working spirit of God or with a feeling of God, God is through you and using you as an instrument. That's all I did. I just let it flow and it all came through. I felt like I was being guided right to him. I knew I was going to find him when I went out there. There was no doubt in my mind." Based on the state of decomposition of Jeff's body, the coroner states that Jeff probably died of heat stroke or heat exhaustion several days earlier. Do you remember earlier in the story when the counselor found Jeff's backpack and thought he saw Jeff's tracks leading away from it? Well, it was later determined that they weren't Jeff's tracks. They weren't even Rocky's tracks. So whose tracks were they? And how is it possible that Jeff's tracks were not there? Rocky said that he and Jeff had spent some time together before he took off alone to look for help. Why would Jeff not go with Rocky? And why would Jeff leave his backpack, his lifeline, behind? He didn't have a ton of survival gear in it, but whatever he did have, like food and a blanket, was all in that backpack. And how did every imaginable resource fail to find him? Was Jeff even there when the searchers came through? Obviously, we will never know the answers to these questions, or exactly what happened to Jeff Hodgson. Teresa Schmidt was a 53-year-old social worker married to a physiology and biophysics professor from the University of Indiana. In the first week of September 2002, he had a conference to go to at the Lost Valley Ranch, about 12 miles southwest of Deckers, Colorado, and only 14 miles as the crow flies from Devil's Head. So while he's busy attending seminars, Teresa gets to enjoy the outdoors that she loved so much. On Friday, September 6th, 2002, Teresa tells her husband before he takes off for his conference activities for the day, "Hey, hon, I'm going to take a hike a little later, but I'll be back in time for dinner." Her plan is a nice trek out to Cheeseman Overlook, just a couple of miles east of the ranch. Now, she had been to the ranch before, so she was familiar with the area. The only difference being that in the early summer of that same year, a massive forest fire had taken out most of the trees around, so it looked a lot different this time. But now all the trees are gone, so it made it even easier to see where you were going. Teresa heads out on the Overlook Trail at about 3 o'clock that afternoon, wearing her bright turquoise windbreaker with a backpack that had a couple of bottles of water and some snacks, and a black fanny pack. Her plan is to be back in time for dinner, but she never returns. Teresa's husband reports her missing at 7 p.m., but search efforts don't really kick into gear until about 2 a.m. Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, Alpine Search and Rescue, helicopters, motorcycles, horses, tracking dogs. But again, the dogs can't pick up on her scent. Her husband even jumps on a motorcycle so he can help look for his wife. The search lasts almost a week before being called off. The only things that are ever found are a couple of her footprints on a ridge near the Overlook. If 70 volunteers shaking down a relatively small search area for Teresa, who, remember, is wearing a bright turquoise jacket in an area with very little ground cover, for 6 days can't find her, I say she's just not there anymore. Dr. John Marshall was a fourth-generation United States Marine who had done a full year as a combat surgeon in Afghanistan and was an attending surgeon for a combat support hospital in Seoul, South Korea for 4 years, along with his wife Susan, also a surgeon. After he and Susan come back to the States and settle in rural Spokane, Washington, John takes a job at the Washington Veterans Affairs Hospital, where he works his way up to Chief of Surgery. January 25th, 2016 starts for John like any other morning with a 5:30 a.m. run starting at the YMCA along the banks of the Spokane River before heading to the hospital for a scheduled 7:30 surgery. At 10:30 that morning, Susan gets a call from the staff at the VA wondering if she knows why her husband is not at work yet. And immediately, she knows something is wrong because according to her, the surgeon's motto is that you don't call in sick, you call in dead. She immediately calls the police, but after feeling like they're not taking the situation seriously enough, she organizes her own search party and starts combing the banks of the Spokane River along his usual morning route. But nobody finds a thing. The next morning, Susan gets the call she was praying would never come. The police have located John's body in the water along the banks of the river. Their prevailing theory? That he slipped from somewhere and fell into the river above the falls, where he went over and circulated in the raging eddies for hours until finally washing up against the riverbank in an area that had been searched multiple times. The autopsy report shows extensive pre-mortem bruising and a massive blow to his chest that broke his sternum and 2 ribs. The coroner says it's probably from hitting rocks on his way down the violent river falls. But his wife, Susan, she's not just a surgeon, she's a trauma surgeon. So she knows a little bit about how different forces act on the human body. Her opinion? The river didn't do that. That injury came from a baseball bat or a 2x4, a blow meant to take someone down. But the authorities rule that John drowned and his death was accidental. Not being one to go down without a fight, Susan hires a private detective, Ted Pulver, a retired cop with 4 decades of law enforcement background. And immediately, Ted finds problems with the state's case. First of all, other than the YMCA security camera footage, the police never check any other CC footage from anywhere else along John's route. Why not? There may not have been footage available for his entire run, but at least there was a chance that they could see if somebody had been following him, or if he indeed had slipped somewhere along the way. Wasted opportunity number 1. Then there is the garden hose and bike tire tube that are right next to the body that are not collected as evidence. As an investigator, wouldn't you want to collect everything within, say, at least 10 feet of that body as possible evidence? Wasted opportunity number 2, the importance of which we'll get to in a minute. Then there's the position of the body. For whatever reason, men's bodies tend to float face down, but John's is found face up with his hands right at his sides, like he was just placed there. Ted spoke with the hydrologist, who says the water level should not have allowed the body to be found where it was in the shallows along the shore. Ted and Susan say the condition of John's body is proof that he didn't spend 27 hours in the water. If he'd been tossed around in the swirling rapids for a whole day, the body would be cut to shreds. The clothing would be ripped and his shoes would probably be gone. But they're not. And river rocks are usually coated with a thin layer of algae or moss. So if John had been banging around in the eddy pools for a full day, he should have some of this algae vegetation on him. But everything on John's body is clean and perfect, including the biggest piece of evidence, his iPod. The YMCA security footage shows him putting his earbuds in as he's leaving the building. When he's found in the river, the iPod is still in his pocket with the cord to the earbuds still attached. How likely is that if he has been thrown around the rapids for 27 hours? But most damning of all is the actual iPod, which police didn't bother to test. After its release from police custody, Ted has it examined by a digital forensic expert who finds the device shows no signs of water damage and powers right up like a champ. So the iPod certainly didn't go down the falls and hang out in the water for 27 hours. One last piece of evidence not included in the autopsy report is a distinctive red line around John's neck, as if a bag or something had been placed over his head. Remember that garden hose and the bike tube that were right next to John on the shore? All of this evidence that does not line up with the state's version of events leads Susan and Ted to believe this was a military-style hit, that someone was waiting for John along his jogging route and hit him in the chest to incapacitate him and then take him to another location where he was possibly waterboarded, killed, and then placed back in the water. Again, the hose right next to his body? For what? No one even has a guess. But I, for one, would like to know if the water in his lungs was tested. Did it have all the silt and microbes you would expect to see from river water? Or was it clean? The military hit theory sounds a bit out there. But then again, the state's theory is no better. They believe he fell into the water. But even they admit they can't figure out where. The only logical spot that someone might stumble into the river is shallow, so they can just stand up. The detective assigned to the investigation admits there is more that doesn't make sense in this case than does. Patrick Mackenzie's story begins in the latter part of the 18th century. A sheep herder by profession, he enjoyed the solace of his sheep, his 2 faithful dogs, and occasionally the companionship of Tom Pickering, another herder who in this case is helping to move their herd of 800 sheep all the way from western Oregon across the Idaho border to just south of Boise near Mayfield in Elmore County. On Tuesday, July 25th, 1893, as the end of the day is getting closer, Patrick directs Tom to ride ahead and find a suitable place to camp while he stays behind with the herd. Tom rides ahead just a couple of miles, finds a good spot, and starts making camp as he waits for Patrick and the herd to catch up. As daylight bleeds into dusk, Patrick's nowhere in sight, and Tom starts to get worried. It's only a couple of miles, and Patrick should have been there by now. Picking up his lantern, Tom heads back to find Patrick. He finds the sheep with one of the herding dogs, but no Patrick. Morning arrives with still no sign of Patrick. Tom starts to search again and finds the sheep scattered, as in missing a herder. Tom finds Patrick's hat, coat, overshirt, and shoes, and his horse's bridle. What he doesn't find is the horse, the other of the two dogs, and any tracks that might give him any clue as to Patrick's direction. Tom gathers what remains of the flock and drives them to a nearby ranch where they can just hang while he goes back to look for Patrick. After days of searching, Tom finally finds Patrick's body under a large sagebrush, miles away from their last meeting point, without a coat, overshirt, or shoes, and disturbingly decomposed. A coroner's inquest declares Patrick's cause of death as unknown, leaving more questions than answers. The state of decomposition of Patrick's body indicates that his death must have happened very soon after parting ways with Tom. But why was he so far from the herd? Now, out in the vast wilderness of 19th century Idaho, running into bandits along the trail is always a danger, but the coroner finds no obvious wounds on Patrick's body, and he still has a gold watch and $29.15, which is $988 in today's dollars, in his pockets, so most likely it wasn't a robbery. And why did he take off his coat, shirt, and shoes before leaving the sheep? And what happened to his horse and his dog? The remaining sheep are auctioned off, with Patrick's mother, brother, and sisters in Scotland receiving the proceeds, but no explanations for the strange circumstances leading to Patrick's death. Benjamin Saul's parents had a cabin just off of Jar Canyon Road, or Highway 67, about a mile west of Rampart Range Road, with a view of Devil's Head Mountain just 8 miles to the south. Benjamin is only 3 years old in 1931, and around dinner time on August 10th, he's playing out in the yard of the cabin. Maybe trying to call him in for dinner, his mother starts calling his name, but no response from little Benjamin. His parents waste zero time before they call the sheriff and the local forest ranger. They in turn contact a bunch of volunteers who immediately jump on their horses and load up their bloodhounds and make their way to the Saul cabin to start searching. For the next 37 hours, the group, including a pilot from Denver who scouts by air, searches for the boy out to a radius of 5 miles. With no luck. The bloodhounds, again, can't even pick up a scent. August 10th turns to August 11th, which then turns to August 12th. So little Benjamin has been out in the elements for 2 nights now when a group of tourists staying at a neighboring ranch see a little boy with a missing sock and a missing shoe near an old car wreck. Benjamin is found, a little hungry and thirsty, and less than a mile from his cabin. The question is, how does this boy not hear searchers, and how do searchers not see him when he's supposedly in a well-traveled area less than a mile from his house? Corey Kelly was born and raised in Crookston, Minnesota, amidst the fertile wildlife area of northern Minnesota, and he loved it. He loved fishing and hunting, and as the years went by, he loved sharing his passion for those things with his 2 sons, Brady and Casey. And I think it's fair to say that when he was out in nature, he was in his happy place. So it certainly didn't surprise anybody when he planned a grouse hunting trip to the Red Lake Wildlife Management Area, northeast of the town of Foretown, Minnesota. Now, grouse are a small game bird related to turkeys and chickens, and they are about the same size and weight as a chicken. And hunting them here in Minnesota, it's a pretty popular thing to do. And he was planning on spending a couple of days in the area with his friend and hunting partner, Jim Neprud, and Jim's yellow lab, Sammy. Now, the two hunters arrived at their familiar campsite on the afternoon of October 16th, 2006. And it wasn't long after they got the campsite all set up that Jim realized they forgot to bring gas. So he says, you know what, you guys stay here. I will run into town and pick up the gas. And as he left camp about 5:30, the last thing that he saw was Corey holding his shotgun with Sammy right next to him, heading out into the woods to start their hunt. And when Jim returned about 7 o'clock, he could tell that Corey had been there because he had started to collect some firewood for the evening. But at that moment, neither Corey nor Sammy were anywhere to be found. And the shotgun was gone too. So Jim just assumed that Corey had gone out again to do more hunting. But in Minnesota, in October, by 7 o'clock, it is starting to get dark. And that night, it was starting to rain. And Jim started getting nervous. And the temperatures had been in the mid-50s that day. But with the sun going down and with this weather moving in, they were starting to drop pretty fast. And Jim knew that Corey was dressed well for the 50-degree weather, but he didn't know how well he was going to fare now that he was probably all wet. And as the evening dragged on into night, Jim actually started to honk the horn and flash the lights on his truck, hoping that if Corey had lost his way to the campsite, he could create this beacon for him and he could find his way back. But nothing. He wakes up at 4 a.m. and Corey and Sammy are still not there. So he gets up to go look for them. And he went out about 2 miles from the campsite before he decided to come back in case Corey came back to the campsite. And in that trip, he saw no sign of either Corey or Sammy. And eventually, a couple of people were passing by the campsite, so Jim managed to flag them down and say, hey, my friend is missing out in the woods. Would you please alert the sheriff's department for me? Now, the campsite is about a half a mile inside the border of Beltrami County. So Beltrami County Sheriff Keith Winger immediately started to organize a search, starting at the campsite and fanning out from there. And even though searchers were on foot and using ATVs, the search was really hard. It's a very difficult area to navigate because of all of the swamps and bogs and tall grass. And the search was massive, eventually activating 62 different agencies, hundreds of volunteers, and it clocked over 6,500 man hours. And the community support was amazing, with the Department of Natural Resources coming to kind of their search headquarters area every day to build campfires for the family so that they could stay warm while they waited to hear any news about Corey. And volunteers would come and sit with them, and a D&E officer actually carved walking sticks for Corey's parents. And some companies actually paid their employees to take time to go help with the search effort. But plenty of people took time off with no pay just to help. And every day, people from the nearby town of Brigla would drive 32 miles each direction just to bring food for the volunteers. Even the Canadian Air Force stationed in Winnipeg, Manitoba, sent planes to do flyovers. On Wednesday, October 25th, 9 days into the search, Sammy was found. And he was immediately taken to a vet who ran some tests, but concluded that other than being hungry and being severely dehydrated, he was in pretty good shape. 3 days later, searchers found Corey's cigarettes and lighter. And a day after that, trackers found his hooded sweatshirt, his overalls, his hat, his socks, and a shotgun shell from the type of gun he was carrying, in almost a perfectly straight line following a drainage ditch that ended 14 miles from camp. On October 30th, 2 weeks into the search, Beltrami County Emergency Management Coordinator Beryl Wernberg announced that the bad weather that was coming in, that had already dropped 2 inches of snow in the area, was forcing her department to temporarily suspend their search efforts. And searchers went back to the area on November 7th, November 9th, and November 22nd, working in dense forest and swamp, but found nothing else. And on November 23rd, the search, which had long ago moved from a rescue operation to a recovery operation, was terminated until the spring. Fast forward to the following April, and the Beltrami Sheriff's Department once again took to the air to try to search that area where all of those personal items had been found the previous October. And on April 28th at 10:20 a.m., just 2 hours into their first day of resuming that search, Corey's body was found just 15 feet off of the trail. An autopsy was performed, and the coroner determined that Corey had most likely died of hypothermia, a tragic accident that left 2 young boys to grow up without their father and 2 parents having to bury their son. An accident that, but for the grace of God, could happen to any hunter in the far north wilderness. Or not. This case has a lot of unanswered questions. Let's remember, Corey was an experienced hunter who was well prepared with a cell phone, a lighter, warm winter clothing, including a coat, a firearm with ammunition, and a dog. Why would he leave camp to go hunting just when it was about to get dark? As an experienced hunter, he would know that's not a good idea, especially in that swampy, boggy terrain. Now, his body was found 14 miles from his campsite. And the sheriff's department says that they believe that Corey traveled that distance in one night, but they neglect to give any details as to why they believe that. Is it really reasonable to assume that a person, even a relatively fit person, could travel that distance of rugged terrain at night in the rain in one night? And why would he be moving at all? As an experienced hunter, he would know that if you are lost, you don't move. You stay where you are and you let the searchers come and find you. You don't keep walking because then you could miss each other. So why wouldn't he have just stayed where he was and used his lighter to build a fire to stay warm? And why didn't he signal for help? He had a cell phone, and okay, the reception probably wasn't the best where he was, but chances are somewhere in that 14-mile hike, he would have pinged a cell tower. But that didn't happen. And why did he take off his clothes? Now, it is true that in the later stages of hypothermia, your muscles have been holding back blood from your extremities, something called vasoconstriction. And those muscles start to get fatigued and let that blood flow back into your extremities, causing that person to feel warm. And when you add in a cold, confused brain, people have been known to start shedding clothing. But in the earlier stages of hypothermia, your body starts making changes to try to generate heat, such as intense shivering, and prevents heat loss by restricting the amount of blood going to the extremities, or that vasoconstriction. So by the time the intense shivering starts, he's going to know he's in trouble. Not only did he have the means to start a fire to warm himself, but he also had Sammy that he could have snuggled with to stay warm. And if he did die the first night, the way the sheriff's department thinks it happened, well, he wouldn't have died of hypothermia anyway because it wouldn't have had time to set in. Yes, the temperature was dropping, and yes, he would have been wet, but the temperatures didn't drop to below freezing until the next day. And he had a gun with ammunition, and as an experienced hunter, he would have known he could have fired a shot in the air to draw people to his location. And why was that gun never found? What about Sammy? Reports say that he had eaten deer meat to stay alive, and that samples of his stomach contents were taken for testing. But there's no evidence that the testing was ever done. So how do they know he ate deer meat? And if he did eat deer meat, where did he get it? A yellow lab is not a hunter the same way that a wolf is a hunter. I have never heard of a domesticated dog taking down a deer. And the report says that he was severely dehydrated. There was more water in that area than he could ever have wanted. How could he have been dehydrated? Dogs aren't exactly shy about drinking whatever water source is available when they're thirsty. And why was Corey's body 15 feet off the trail? If you are lost and want to be found, wouldn't you stay on the trail in a place more likely for people to find you? Not to mention the fact that searchers had already been through that area. So where was he the first time they went through? Now, some reports say that he was found with a lip balm container full of methamphetamine. Mystery solved, right? High on meth and running around like a crazy person. Except the toxicology report came back clean. So what exactly would cause a normal, drug-free human being to freak out and go on a 14-mile rampage, leaving any shred of reason and logic behind? Were his discarded possessions the result of a cold-addled brain? Or could he have been trying to leave a trail? And it seems like the only way he could have traveled that far, that fast, is if he had been running. Running from what?